You're listening to the Keane Fitness Podcast, where Irish fitness entrepreneur Keane answers your questions and interviews leaders in the world of fitness, health, mindset, and natural wellness. Come join the fun.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Keane Fitness Podcast. We talk everything fitness, nutrition, and mindset to help you with your goals. Today's episode is going to be a little bit of an untraditional one in the sense that I'm going to go off normal script from a Q&A or a solo topic or even a podcast interview where I feature a guest and try and deconstruct their lifestyles and the things that make them successful in fitness and health. And I'm going to talk today on Marathon des Sables. So my experience running 256 kilometers self-sufficient through the Sahara Desert in Morocco. I know a lot of you were following my journey on Instagram, some of you on Snapchat, some on Facebook. I've been putting a lot on Instagram and Instagram stories lately, so that's probably the best platform to follow me at the minute for everything that I'm doing in general lifestyle, and I put up a lot of tips and tricks and the foods I was bringing with me to the desert, the training that I was doing in the lead up. So I'm going to use today's episode to kind of jump back and forth, and apologies in advance if it's not super structured, because I'm literally going to free flow a lot of this episode, talk through my experience in the lead up to Marathon des Sables and my reasoning for doing it, my experience while I was over there, some funny stories, some scary stories, and the aftermath and how I have felt coming out the other side. I'm home just under a week now, and I wanted to give it a couple of days before I recorded this podcast to kind of sit in the afterglow and kind of conceptualize and articulate my thoughts of the experience that I had. So hopefully it'll provide a lot of value to you listening, regardless of what it is you're trying to achieve in your life or right now, whether it's your fitness goals of building muscle, losing body fat, improving your performance, or your lifestyle. It's something to do with your mindset in terms of strengthening that up so you can be a better version of you. Hopefully some of the stories and anecdotes from today's episode will support you on that journey, and I'm going to free flow it and ebb and flow back and forth, so hopefully you enjoy this week's episode. So the first thing, for those of you that are new listening to the podcast, the Marathon des Sables is coined the toughest foot race on earth, and with good reason. As I get into today's episode, you'll see why it's very, very justly and amply named the toughest foot race on earth. It's basically a 250 kilometer plus race through the Sahara Desert, self-sufficient, so meaning that you carry all your food on your back for the 6 days, and it's how it's broken down effectively is a marathon each day followed by a double marathon, so an ultra marathon on the day 4 where there's a time cap of 35 hours to complete it, so that can branch into 2 days, and then it finishes with a marathon. So the lead up to Marathon des Sables, I know a lot of you have been following me on Instagram and other social media platforms, and you've seen how my training has evolved, how my nutrition has evolved to try and support myself getting through this race. Just to give you a little bit of a context, I'm not from a running background. For those of you who've listened to the podcast and aren't even familiar with the way that I look, I'm not really built for marathon running. I'm about 84 kilos, about 9 or 10% body fat. I carry quite a lot of muscle on my frame. I'm short and stocky in stature, and I've got that traditional old school farmer's build of thick, dense muscle. And running marathons and running ultra and endurance events isn't necessarily the way that my body is built. But I have changed up my training a lot since August when I started to prepare for this event first. So the original transition of my training, and this hopefully will stand to you regardless of whatever it is you're trying to achieve, whether it's building up to a 5 kilometer run or a half marathon or a full marathon, or trying to lose body fat or build muscle, whatever your goal is, one of the pieces of advice that I'll regularly give on the podcast is you chunk it down, and when you know what the end goal is, you just reverse engineer it. And looking at things in a context of the whole, where you're looking at the end goal, that can be super daunting. And when you start to chunk things down and break down the targets and break down the daily tasks and getting the right things done each day, leading up to your event, leading up to your race, leading up to whatever date you set that you want to look a certain way or perform a certain way, can massively support you in terms of hitting the end goal without being overwhelmed, where you end up overthinking how big the goal is that you've set, and then you freak yourself out over it. And I've done this in the past. I was a living example until probably the age of 25, when I started to condition my mind to think and see things in other ways. And when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. And I started to break down the bigger goals that I set for myself into smaller tasks. I love the old adage on how do you eat an elephant. The answer is bite by bite, that you don't focus on the massive goal that you've set yourself, whatever that is. You break it down into manageable tasks and you do the right things every day. Some of you were following my Snapchat back in August when I signed up first for this Marathon des Sables, and I did my 2-kilometer run. And I was nearly throwing up at the end of the workout. I recorded it on Snapchat. I was very, very active before the Snapchat update. And a lot of you are messaging back going, that's going to be difficult. That race is going to be hard, but you can do it. A lot of positive comments that I got back. But that 2-kilometer run had me questioning my entire decision. Even though I knew that my body would respond, your self-talk is critical during these times, because when you come off a treadmill, and I only did 2 kilometers, and this Marathon des Sables broke into marathon day after day with a double marathon and then a single marathon to finish in the Sahara, one of the hottest places on earth, in different types of sand, where you're moving and shuffling and running and jogging, and you're changing up your pace depending on the type of sand that you're running in. And I was on a treadmill and felt like I was going to get sick after 2 kilometers. But a funny thing happens when you know the end goal is right. It's pyramid of prioritization. I knew if I wasn't able to run a marathon, there was no way I was going to be able to do the Marathon des Sables, 6 back-to-back marathons in a row in the desert. So I focused on building up my runs gradually. I went from 2 kilometers at the end of every workout to 4 kilometers at the end of every workout to 5 kilometers at the end of every workout, until I built up to 10 kilometers at the end of every workout. And then I would scale up my training days, where I would do 20 kilometers one day, 10 kilometers another day, 20 kilometers another day, and I would rotate that until I was building in 50 to 100 kilometers every single week. So it's funny because your body will adapt, and that fear of the hardest workout in the beginning, whether you start running first or start the gym first or start training first, that initial fear and story that gets in your head of, I don't know if I can do this, that's the exact reason why you need to push past it, because your body will adapt, your mindset will change, and everything will become relative to you at that moment in time. Once upon a time, 20 kilometers seemed like a ridiculous amount of distance to run, and then that 20 kilometers became the foundation pillar of my Monday run. So I would start the week with 20 kilometers, and I used to end the week with 20 kilometers, and then I would vary up the distance in between. And because the relativity had changed, my mindset had moved forward, and you're able to change the way that you look at everything. And what I started to notice in other areas of my life, in business, in relationships, in particularly personal relationships, my mother, my daughter, is all these daunting goals that you set yourself, or these massive BHAGs, big, hairy, audacious goals that you set yourself. When you start to chunk them down, they seem significantly less daunting. And when you have a reference point from training that, well, I nearly got sick when I did my first 2-kilometer run, and then you're doing 20 kilometers very, very comfortably, you start questioning everything that you've told yourself about where you've limited your belief systems. So one of the reasons that I signed up to the Marathon des Sables in the first place was a combination of two. One was I was very aware that the person I had to become was on the other side of that event, because it fucking terrified me when I heard about the event first. My friend Tom, who'll be on the podcast hopefully in a couple of weeks, is an ultra runner, very, very successful ultra runner. And he told me about this event at Tony Robbins Business Mastery in Amsterdam last year. And I thought it was absolutely insane. He was telling me about people hooked up to IVs, people puking blood, that I'll actually talk to when I tell you about some of my own experiences in the desert. And I thought, this race is absolutely insane. It terrified me. and it made me question if it was something I can do. And that was the first time in probably 2 or 3 years when my automatic system 1 thought process, my automatic go-to thought was, I don't think I can do that. So that's effectively the reason that I signed up for it. I'll regularly talk on the podcast, and I've spoken my book, The Fitness Mindset, and I've spoken on other channels, either with interviews or on my own social media, that behind every fear is a person that you want to be. And when you start attacking the things that you're afraid of, and you realize that fear is just false evidence appearing real, and you start attacking that, there's always a stronger version of you out the other side. And this was the basic physical manifestation of that showing up in the first time in about 2 or 3 years, because I was terrified. And I have a post that I'm going to put up probably sometime this week of the day before I flew out to the Sahara, just to give people a little bit of context, because I'm aware that sometimes what we see on social media and what we hear on podcasts and what we see on, different channels, we can put people on a pedestal. I'm not saying that people have done that with me, but when you hear of an event like Marathon des Sables, and particularly when I tell you some of the things that happened at it, you can sometimes put people on a pedestal that have finished that race or have done that race or have done whatever it is that you think is amazing or that you think you couldn't do. I was fucking terrified the day before I flew out. And I remember thinking that I literally had to do all the techniques that I've spoken about, that I use with my GA players, and I use with people that deal with anxiety, and I use with people coming through my programs that are dealing with situations and scenarios where they're scared for a job interview, or they're scared for some area that's showing up in their life, that they are building it up in their own head. And I actually wrote it down in the notes on my phone to show you that everybody fucking feels that. And the difference between quote unquote successful people, or quote unquote the other reframe of that, of people that get stuff done, is successful people feel the fear and they do it anyways. That's the only fucking difference. And I was terrified the day before, and if somebody had given me an out, even though I wouldn't have taken it, it would have crossed my mind. And I just remember I couldn't think about anything else. I was having nightmares for 2 weeks coming up to it. I couldn't focus on anything else because of some of the unknown things that you need to deal with something like Marathon des Sables, like dealing with things like snakes and scorpions. You've got to have your venom pump on you at all times in case a poisonous snake or a poisonous scorpion stings you and you're able to get the venom out. That was giving me nightmares. The thought of what happens if, you get ill or something happens to you in the desert where you're puking blood, which is some of the stories I had heard, and you start to have organs shut down, which has happened. A couple of people have died during this event. And all these stories started to circulate in my head. Now, I'm aware they're false evidence appearing real, but they were still manifesting themselves in the subconscious and were giving me nightmares. And I had that fear all up until the day before I went. And I wrote it down on my phone, exactly how I was feeling. And I'm going to post it on my Instagram, so stay tuned for that. Just to show that regardless of who it is that you follow or who it is that you look up to, I'm not saying that you're necessarily on one of those people that you look up to, but whoever it is in your life that you look up to and you put on a pedestal, whether it's competitors or inter-county players or marathon runners or Instagram celebrities or business people, whatever it is, whoever it is you're putting on that pedestal, realize that those people feel the fear too. They don't let them stop them. That's the only difference. And that's just conditioning and setting yourself targets and hitting those targets, because every time you set a goal and you hit it, you build self-confidence, and self-confidence and self-beliefs is like legs on a chair. The more legs that you have on a chair or a table, the more support it has. And every time you say you're going to do something and then you go out and do it, you end up supporting and adding an extra leg to that table or that chair, and you end up believing it, and your story starts to change. The story you tell yourself, your self-talk, that inner voice in your head starts to change. It starts to move from I don't know if I can do that or I can't do that to I can do that or how can I do that. That's just a mindset shift, and anybody can do that. Coming from as a person up until the age of 25 that questioned everything I did and always had that automatic system 1, what Daniel Kahneman talks in his book Thinking Fast and Slow about our system 1, our automatic thought process, the cognitive bias in our brain, the automatic way that our brain goes or our thoughts go when we hear about something. And up until the age of 25, my automatic thoughts was, I don't know if I can do that. It's somebody else that does that, or I can't achieve these things because who am I, or who would listen to me, or who even cares? They are my stories that I told myself. And what happened from probably the age of 25 on was I started to question those stories. I started to question those limitations. And every time you move past it, and every time you change and hit a target that you've set for yourself, your automatic thought starts to change. And now every time I see a target or I see a goal, my automatic go-to now is normally, how can I do that? Or what do I have to do? Or who do I have to become in order to hit that goal or become that person so I can achieve this thing? When your automatic thought process changes to that, it makes you very, very limitless on everything that you try and set out and achieve, and realize that that's a learned skill. I went from one way completely to telling myself that I couldn't do something or I wasn't that person to achieve. It's why I didn't do anything in my life up until probably the age of 25, was because I had those self-limiting stories. I had that negative self-talk that would come into my head. That voice that told me I couldn't, or told me I shouldn't, or told me that I wouldn't be good enough would pop into my head, and I would let it dictate the direction I took my life. When you start to set other targets and you start attacking things that you're afraid of, that new voice starts to take over. And when I get into some of the thoughts that were coming through my mind, particularly on the long day, which was the 86-kilometer run, which was mentally and physically definitely the hardest thing I've ever done, how some of that self-talk supported me through. So that was my reason for signing up. That's kind of how my training changed, and setting goals. And one of the reasons that I love fitness so much is that it represents other areas of your life. When you're able to do it in one area, how you do anything is how you do everything. And when you set targets for yourself and you break down the bigger goals into smaller components and then attack it day by day and get this day right, and then do that consistently over time, you end up hitting the end goal, and it doesn't seem as daunting. That's the same for business. That's the same for relationships. That's the same for all other areas of your life. Whatever ladder against whatever wall that you're climbing, you take one step and then you take the next step. You do one day and then you do the next day. Step by step you get ahead, not necessarily in fast spurts. And when you do that consistently, you can hit any goal and you can hit any target. So that was my lead up to Marathon des Sables. So to take you forward a little bit, the day I flew out, there was a lot of unknowns going on in my head. As somebody that I ran one marathon, I ran the Dubai Marathon in preparation for this. I'd never ran a marathon before in my life, and the only marathon I had run was purely to prepare for this. And when I was flying out, there was a lot of unknowns. I remember the feeling of sitting on a plane, which was a chartered plane to Morocco, with people that I was looking around at that had Ironman tattoos and that had ran 100-kilometer races day after day. They were ultramarathon runners, and getting that feeling of, I don't think I belong here, and that feeling of overwhelm, which kind of combined with, I'm going to make sure that I get this done, and I'm going to power through and take one step and control everything that I can control in order to finish this race and get to the finish line where I can fly my Irish flag at the end and feel like I've achieved something that once terrified me. And what is so difficult about the Marathon des Sables isn't necessarily the steps you have to take. It's not necessarily the marathons. It's not necessarily the running. It's everything else. Because of the way it's set up, there's so many things that can put you out of the race, that can literally make you DNF, did not finish. It can make you TKO, total knockout, where you can't continue the race and you get pulled. And a lot of people were pulled day after day, and I'll break down the 6 days one by one and some of the experiences that I've had and some of the things that I saw. But it wasn't necessarily the runs that would put you out in hindsight, because you can train for the run. You can do lots and lots of running. You can do lots of conditioning up hills. I had a 15-kilo backpack starting, just under 15 kilos, which is about double the weight of nearly everybody else there, because I had food. And I brought a lot of real food with me, as opposed to some of the expedition meals that other racers used and other people used. I used real food because that's what I'd use all in preparation in my runs. It's what my body's used to. So I had a lot of oats, I had rice protein, I had Bella Bites, which is those coconut snacks, I had almonds, I had Numa Naturals dried fruit, and I had a lot of different food groups that I'd use all in preparation. So they ended up weighing a lot more. So when I flew out to Morocco and they weighed our bag the first day, the guy who weighed my bag started to laugh and he goes, "Are you carrying all this?" And I told him, yes, I was. But I was about 84 kilos at the start line, and carrying 15 kilos on my back wasn't necessarily a problem for me because I had trained with weight in my back during my runs. But that wasn't the thing that was going to put you out. It was all the other things that could potentially set you back. It was not having enough food. And I actually ran out of food on the last day and had to get a lot from my tent mates, who I'll talk about later on, who were an unbelievable support. And I've made some incredible friends just from the experience of pushing through tough times. And I actually ran out of food on the last day, on the Friday for the last marathon. So I had to get food from other people. The other thing that can put you out is the fact that you're sleeping outside in a tent in the middle of the Sahara. So I had a very, very scary experience on day 2 when a sandstorm hit that I'll break down as I chunk down the days. And there was a lot of things that could mentally freak you out. So running through the desert and seeing snakes, running through the desert and seeing scorpions, some of whom are poisonous, one of the reasons why you need your venom pump on hand. Your blisters on your feet, that unbelievable heat that hits the Sahara between 12 and 3 p.m. that could literally wipe you out completely. It's all of these other factors that makes the race so difficult. Running the marathons, as difficult as it is, even with that 86 kilometer, that double marathon on the Thursday on day 4, that's doable. It's trainable because you can literally condition your body to do it. And if you have the mental strength, you can push through and just consistently move forward. But it's all the other things that can put you out of Marathon des Sables. It's things like sanitation. So I wasn't going to necessarily talk about this in the podcast, but I will, seeing as this is completely unfiltered and raw, is the fact that there's no toilets in the desert. So one of the biggest issues that can happen with people is because you're taking shits outside and you're going to the toilet outside, guys and girls, everybody that's there, the sanitation isn't great. So if you don't have disinfectant for your hands after, and then you're eating your food, you can get all sorts of bacteria in your stomach, and people are getting food poisoned or they're getting sickness, and then they're puking blood, and all these other issues, which are some of the things that I saw with people, can come up and can completely put you out. There was a guy in my tent, Johnny, who was just an amazing guy. He actually was in the Marathon des Sables 2 years ago, and he got pulled from the race because he was pissing blood and puking blood because his sanitation or his food was off. He was dehydrated and his body started to shut down, and they told him that he might need dialysis and they had to pull him from the race. He came back and finished it this year. And talking to people that had experienced it, and there was 2 guys that I spoke to, Johnny and Garrett, that had previously ran the race. One had finished it, one hadn't. And talking to people who had done it nearly instantly put a lot of my fears at rest. And I've spoken in the podcast before that the smart people learn from their mistakes, the really sharp ones learn from the mistakes of others. It's actually the last quote in my book of the fitness mindset, because I'm talking about people learning from my mistakes in fitness, nutrition, and mindset. And it shows up in all areas of life. When you talk to the people who have done what you want to do, or who have failed on the path you want to fail, and what set them back, it can massively minimize the issues that you have. So I was ridiculously diligent with my hand sanitizer, and the guys in my tent were the same. We had antiseptic wipes, and we were absolutely controlling everything that was completely controllable so that you wouldn't get set back by some contamination of food. So that was one of those controllables. And there was a joke with me and my man Simon, who I ran the race with. We helped each other pace each other. And one of my favorite quotes that he would slag me about is control the controllables. And I apply this to all areas of my life, because it's not completely dissimilar to the serenity prayer. And I'm not a religious person, but I love the serenity prayer of God, grant me the serenity to understand the things that I can't change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And controlling the controllables is a version of that. Everything that's in your control. Everything that you can't control, you gotta let it go, because there's nothing you can do about it. I couldn't control the heat in the desert. I couldn't control the sandstorm that came on day 2. I couldn't control the ridiculous mountain jebels, the sand mountains that we had to climb on day 2 that nearly wiped me out. I couldn't control any of these things, but I can control my sanitation. I can control the food I put into my body. I can control the pace that I set myself at. I was able to control the training that I did in the lead up. When you control the controllables, confidence comes from knowing that everything that you could have done has been done, and leaving everything that you can't do beside you or behind you, because there's nothing you can do about it. And it's funny because this shows up in relationships with people, controlling the things you can control. And some of the soul searching things that I had to deal with that came up with me, because you're running long periods of time through the desert. A lot of the time you're in your own head, and realizing that things like relationships and things like business relationships or personal relationships, you can only control the things you can control. And when you start to worry what everybody else is doing, and you start to worry about other people, there's nothing you can do about that. And when you relinquish that control and do everything that focuses on you and make yourself the strongest version of you, or the best partner you can be, or the best business person you can be, or the best influencer or fitness person or competitor or athlete that you can be, all the other stuff starts to dissipate, because there's nothing you can do about it. And when you control the controllables, you give yourself a massive fighting chance in succeeding, and you also just let go of the things that you can't control. So day 1 was probably a little bit of a false start for me, in terms of I felt really good leading into the race. I had trained very, very strongly. I was consistently at 50 to 100 kilometers every week. I varied up different hill runs. I had been used to running with a pack on my back. I had my nutrition dialed in, and day 1 came, and it was pretty cool in terms of heat. As hot as the desert gets, it can get between 40 and 50 degrees in the Sahara. It was pretty cool on day 1. So we got through day 1, and myself and Simon paced ourselves that we would literally just take it at an easy pace, get through day 1, get the marathon out of the way, and then build into day 2. So we got through day 1. A couple of people dropped out because of the heat and the condition. The biggest difficulty that I hadn't thought about in the lead up to the event was all the different types of sand. And there's about 10 different types of fucking sand. There's sand where there's rocks that completely wreck your feet, and my feet were mangled by the end of this event. And then there's the sand dune, which is kind of like running in snow, where you take a step and it comes up to your knees. And there's a joke within people that run in Marathon des Sables at the MDS that it's called the Sahara Shuffle. It's not really a run, it's not really a jog, it's not really a walk. It's more of a shuffle through sand. And when you're running through the dunes, that's kind of how it feels. You're not really, even though you're putting in the same effort that it takes to run, you're not really moving at any speed faster than a walk. So day 1 was a combination of these different things. Came through that pretty unscathed, even though I lost one eye about halfway through. We got hit with a mini sandstorm that came, a kind of a cross breeze when we were going on a long stretch of desert, and it went into the eye underneath my glasses, and I lost one of my eyes, in the sense that I lost sight in it. So I ran the last 20 kilometers with one eye completely closed, and then I went back to the medical tent after, and they had drops and they had liquid, and they completely cleaned it out. And I was perfect then again by the following day. So with the exception of running half the race or half the run with one eye, we got through day 1 pretty unscathed. It was when day 2 hit that really shit started to get real, because not only was it ridiculously hot, and there was a point when it must have been between 40 and 50 degrees, and you were just moving in the heat. There was also 2 sand jebels, which are effectively mountains. So if you think of Binbulben and Sligo, or a couple of mountains that are pretty decently sized in Ireland. They were the size of these fucking mountains, but they were sanded. So you're climbing up these and you're trying to get grip off the sand and grab at any piece of rock that you can. There was 2 of these Jebels on day 2. So in between your run, you're actually running up or walking up or climbing up Jebels. And there is a part of Marathon des Sables that I didn't explain to a lot of people. I think it's called repartition. I gotta Google that. I'm doing this very free flow in this episode on one take, but it's basically a waiver that they say that they can send your body back to your country if you die. And there was times during that Jebel climb that if you fell, you were fucking dead. And you had to be so conscious of where you were putting your foot, where you were putting your hand, and where you were climbing, because one fall off it, you were going to tumble back down, and there was a very, very good chance that you weren't surviving that. And there was 2 of these fucking Jebels on that day. In top of the heat, moving through those was torturous. And I remember the last 10 kilometers, there was 3 of us on this day. There was myself, there was Simon, and there was Paddy. And we were pacing each other and sticking with each other, trying to just motivate when one was down or 2 were down, trying to keep each other up and high going through the event, and just making sure that we were safe going up the Jebels. One would be in front of the other, and then we'd take turns and we'd switch. And I remember Paddy broke out this pack of Chewits sweets about 10 kilometers from the end, and they felt like fucking orgasm in my mouth, because one of the things that I didn't take into consideration for Marathon des Sables was the effects that certain foods can have on your overall mood. Now, I covered nutrition to the point. I had between 3,000 and 4,000 calories. I ended up picking up extra food as I went along, but I had between 3,000 and 4,000 calories every day. My nutrition was dialed in. I had my fats, my proteins, and my carbs. My body was perfectly fueled. But I thought about or misunderstood the actual mood pickup that certain foods and certain sweets can give you. And I'll never forget, I'll never look at a pack of Chewits again like the feeling that they gave after coming down that second Jebel and your body is just wiped. Your feet are completely mangled. They're swelling in the heat of the sun. They're mangled from the rocks on the sand. And Paddy broke out these pack of Chewits and we split them, the pack between 3 of us. And the lift that gave into the last 10 kilometers was enough to pick us up to the end. And then probably the most scary experience, or the most scary time of the entire Marathon des Sables, hit that night. I got through day 2 pretty unscathed. I started to get a couple of blisters on my feet. They swell and you have to go a size up in your shoe coming into the Marathon des Sables because your feet can swell with the heat. Also, your feet are protected with gaiters, and in terms of not getting sunburnt, you can cover up a lot of your skin. So one of the, again, controlling the controllables that I was able to control was I knew that if I got sunburnt, I was going to be out. A couple of people dropped out on day 2, and there was 30 people overall that dropped out on day 2 because of the heat. Some of them got burnt. Some people were starting to puke blood because of dehydration, and they were pulled out of the race. And controlling the controllables, controlling the sun was something I was able to do. So with the exception of my nose and the front of my knees and the back of my knees, everything else was covered. So I was covered head to toe so that I wouldn't get burnt by the sun. But one of the things that I didn't think about in the lead up to the race or the event was sandstorms. And for anyone that doesn't know what a sandstorm is, it's basically as it sounds. It's kind of like a horrible storm that you get in Ireland or the UK where it's all wet and wind and rain, but it's the sand equivalent. And it's just up an extra notch in terms of the speed at which it hits you, in terms of it goes from very, very quiet and still to a full-blown storm in the space of about 2 minutes. And the velocity at which the sand hits you, because there's very little protection in the desert, the sand hits you and it can knock you straight. And what happened on the night of day 2 was a pretty scary experience in the sense that the way the tents are set up in Marathon des Sables, there's 7 person to a tent. So I had amazing guys with me in the tent. I had Johnny to my left, I had Fergal to my right, Simon was beside him, Pete, who was a 6'7" cop from the UK, was beside him, and then Hugh was in the far side. There was 7 of us to a tent. And what happened on night 2 was a sandstorm hit. But it came very, very suddenly, because they come from, the space of being very, very calm and quiet to full-blown storm in about 2 minutes. You don't have a lot of time to prepare. So when the storm hit, it started to rip everything from the ground. So the only analogy, or the only picture that I can give, is think of a minor hurricane and being out in the middle of it. And what happens is, when you're sleeping in the tent and sleeping in the desert, is I had a sleeping bag. So I had a special sleeping bag for the desert. And then you've got your backpack, which you'd normally use as a pillow. And that's got everything in it. It's got your food. It's got your training kit for the next day. It's got absolutely everything. You're self-sufficient for those 6 days. You have nothing with you except for what you have on your back. And the sandstorm hit and started to fucking take everything. So everybody's clothes and everything in the other tents that wasn't nailed down were taken with the sandstorm. And then it got really bad, and it started to pick up a lot of speed. And what happened was, the storm, even though the tents were nailed down with fucking big nails, the storm started to take them. And Johnny, who was to my left, was on the far side of the tent, and I was right beside him. And these nails started to come up from the tent, and one of them smashed him right in the hand, completely buckled his knuckles. He's very, very fortunate, because if it hit him in the head, it probably would have killed him. And the storm picked up the tent. So the half of the tent that me and Johnny were on, the storm completely took it. And we were outside and isolated with the storm hitting, and we had zero protection. So what we had to do effectively was, Johnny was calling at me. I was wrapped up in my tent, and Johnny was calling at me, shouting that his hand had been smashed. He needs help because the other part of the tent was blowing up, and there was a big fucking steel rod holding that down, and we were afraid that it was going to cut through one of us. And then we had to get our knife. So in the middle of the sandstorm, I had to grab my glasses and my buff. Johnny was putting on all his kit so that he could see a little bit. We had to grab a knife and cut off the rope that was holding the tent so that the peg wouldn't come and smash anybody. And then when the tent was taken away, we literally had to go into our sleeping bags, lie on top of our bags, because the bag would have been taken away. We had to lie on top of our bags, close up our sleeping bag, and the picture that I had in my head was like Kenny from South Park, where you just literally close up your entire sleeping bag so there's nothing coming in. And as soon as you opened it, it would just fill up with sand, because the sand was blowing at you. That was a scary experience for 2 reasons. One, when Johnny was screaming beside me that his hand had been smashed, none of us could see. So no one was able to see what was going on, because the storm was just hitting you in the face with sand. You weren't able to make anything out. You could see the light that Johnny had on his head, and then trying to get your knife out, hoping that your knife wouldn't be blown out of your hand and hit anybody, and then hoping that the pole from the ground wouldn't come up when you were taking it and trying to cut the piece of rope, hoping that that wouldn't come up and smash you, because it would cut straight through you. If that hit you in the head, you'd be stone cold dead, because it'd pierce straight through you with the speed of the storm. And wrapping in, I remember when Johnny was safe and we got him back down, and he made sure everything was okay on my side. We got my knife back in. The two of us there was a part of the tent that was covering the other guys, and then me and Johnny were isolated on the outside, and we were pulled up our sleeping bags. And I remember we were trying to wait it out, and this storm went on for about 2 fucking hours, and I was sitting in my sleeping bag, and I was afraid. It was one of those moments that I didn't, even though I knew we were probably going to be okay, there was a part of me that was afraid, because there was a lot of shit that could have gone wrong. The fact that the steel pipe had come up and smashed Johnny in the hand meant that all the other tents were also vulnerable to that, and anything could come across and slit you through, and you're kind of sitting in your sleeping bag not knowing, fuck, if something catches me here, you know, it could pierce the vital organ, or could pierce me, or could do some damage, or you start playing all these stories in your head. And I was literally just there. I was thinking about my mum, I was thinking about my daughter. It was reinforcing all the things that I was very, very grateful for in my life. And I remember there was about a half an hour period in, I couldn't fucking sleep through it. I was just sitting in my sleeping bag. I had it completely pulled over so no sand could come in. I was lying on top of my bag so my bag wouldn't be taken by the storm. And there was one point where we couldn't hear anybody. We couldn't hear anybody else in the tent. But Johnny reached out with his foot or reached out with his hand. And I remember the sense of relief realizing that there was somebody beside you was like a fucking warmth crossing over your body. And it's so weird because I think Johnny was just reaching out for something, or I don't know, was he reaching out to see was there somebody else there? But I felt his hand or his foot beside my bag, and there was a sense of calm, and I was like, okay, well, at least he's okay, I'm okay. And the other guys were covered because the tent or the blanket on the side of it, the heavy blanket that covers, was covering the guys for as far as I could see, or as far as I knew. And what came out the other side, we woke up the next morning, Johnny's hand was completely smashed. Everybody else was okay. We lost cut bits and pieces. Lots of other people were walking all around the camp looking for their stuff that had been blown away, and everything was covered in sand. Like, it looked like someone had thrown up sand on top of everybody. It was covered. You couldn't even see the people under the tent or under the blankets or under their sleeping bags because they were covered in sand. They just looked like dunes that had been covered. And I remember when I went back to the hotel on the Saturday when we finished, having 4 walls and a roof is something that I will never take for granted in my life for as long as I live. That was scary. And it makes me question the people that do have to live outside, and homeless people and all these other issues that again showed up. And I suppose to live that for one night is worth more than reading it 1,000 times. And I will never take having 4 walls and a roof for granted ever again, because that is just something that, again, we can say, and I've said in the past how grateful I am for the things that I have. I remember that first night in the hotel on that Saturday night, being able to go into a bed and knowing that I was protected by the walls and the roof was sent me with a sense of gratitude like I've never felt before. And that was a scary experience, even though truly I knew that we were probably going to be okay and we'd have a good story coming out of it. Myself and Johnny fucking laughed for the rest of the week about it. And myself and the other lads have since talked about it on WhatsApp, and you know, it was just fucking crazy experience. But that was one of those moments that was probably the hardest part, even though there was other difficult parts. That was the only part where I was a little bit scared for my safety. Even though climbing up the Sables, because it's in your control, you can focus, you can put one step in front of the other, you can climb the rocks, you can get a sturdy rock, and you can control a lot of what you're doing. There was no control in the sandstorm, and it was something I wasn't mentally prepared for because I'd never heard about it. And again, it's luck of the draw. That was one of the years that it hit the worst, and doesn't happen every time. So it was an experience that I'm very grateful to have came out the other side for, and to think about every night since I've been home, which is about 6 nights now, a little bit longer when this episode goes out. It's going out this day week. And every night now, I think about those 4 walls and the roof and how grateful I am to have those. And that's just a little bit of a side note from that experience, because I think you have to, personally from my experience anyway, you have to live that, or you have to experience it firsthand to really understand the feeling of dealing with that fear and coming out the other side of it, and the gratitude that comes from it. So yeah, that was the day 2 and night number 2. So then day 3 then was another marathon, which again was difficult. The heat was killer, but we took this day pretty easy purely because nobody had slept the night before because of the sandstorm, and also we had the long day coming up on day 4, which is 86 kilometers, which is a double marathon, and you're timed out after 35 hours. So We took day 3 pretty easy, nothing too crazy. Everyone was so tired. Everybody was just completely run down from the night before, and we knew we had the long day coming. So day 3 went down without a hitch, in terms of got through, put one foot in front of the other, and then led us into that long day, which is by far the physically hardest thing that I've ever done in my life. So day 4 is notoriously known in the Marathon des Sables as the day that can break people. It's got a super high dropout rate. People were losing their fucking minds because of the heat and the distance. And I love the If poem by Rudyard Kipling, and I'm paraphrasing here slightly, but he says that the world belongs to those who are able to keep their head when everyone around them is losing theirs. And I had to keep that in my mind, even though I don't take any strength in seeing people lose their mind, but I take strength in the fact that I'm not losing mine. And there was a lot of things that could make you lose your freaking mind this day. The heat would kill you during the day, the distance, the ability to put one foot in front of the other, knowing that even though you ran 40 kilometers or 42 kilometers a marathon, that you're only halfway there, that you have to power through the night, or some people were able to sleep at checkpoints. I went straight through the night. Myself, Simon and Paddy, who stayed together for that, we went straight through the night and were able to pace each other. And that was an experience in itself. The ultra runner, I think Dean Carnazzi, if I'm probably butchering his pronunciation, and we joked about this on the journey, where he said, if you want to run a mile. If you want to change your life, run a marathon. If you want to see God or talk to God, run an ultra marathon. And that's kind of how that day felt. It was mentally tough, but physically it just breaks your body down. I was mentally prepared. I knew it was going to be hard, and I'd never done any distance over a marathon. It took just under 24 hours to complete. But a weird thing happened when you're doing a race or doing something that's so physically demanding. You take little wins everywhere you can. And the start of that race was so hard. The first 20 kilometers were so hard because you're 20 kilometers in, you're a half marathon in, and you still got 66 fucking kilometers to go. And you're about 20 kilometers in, you're in the desert heat. We were running across this sand lake. So there's a part of sand that's like used to be a lake at some stage and is now covered in hard sand. And the heat was just pulsing down on you, and you're carrying, I still had about 10 kilos in my backpack at this stage. I was picking up food along the way with different people that were throwing out theirs, and the heat would just drain you. And about 20 kilometers in, three of us decided that we were going to plug in our music because none of us could talk. And we plugged in our music, and for the next 20 kilometers, we just listened to music. But then the sun started to go down. And you take a little bit of a win when you're 40 kilometers in or 45 kilometers in, and it's not as hot, and you're able to move a little bit faster. And we made up a lot of pace and speed on that day because it wasn't as hot, because it becomes nighttime, because you're running straight through the night. So you plug on your head torch. Everybody that's running has to get glow sticks, and they put them on their backpack. So there's times when you're walking through the desert and walking through the sand dunes and you haven't slept. You're 18, 19, 20 hours in, and all you can see is just fucking light ahead of you. It's a beautiful thing because you're kind of starting to see things at that stage. You're so depleted, you're so tired, you're so hungry, you're so mildly dehydrated because your water is rationed throughout. They give you water at each checkpoint, but it's rationed, so they're generous with it, and you have enough water. As long as you don't spill any, you'll be fine, but it's rationed. And all you can see in the distance is these glow sticks. So you're walking through the sand dunes, and it is an amazing experience. There was one point when we got to about checkpoint 5, which is about 50 kilometers in, and it was just jet black, and there's nothing around. There's no people, there's no houses, there's nothing except for the desert. And all you could see was the people that would be a mile or 2 miles ahead of you, and you could see these little glow sticks on their back, and you had a light on your head that you were running in, and that's all you could see was everything that was in front of you. Now, the scary thing that happens on the long day is when nighttime comes in the desert, all your fucking creepy crawlies start to come out. So we saw snakes, we saw scorpions, and there was just countless amounts in the camel grass as we were running through about a 20-kilometer stretch. Now, you're moving at a speed that you're able to move past them. You've got to be wary of certain scorpions. I've forgotten the name of the scorpion, but there's these small little golden scorpions that can instantly paralyze you if they sting you, and they warn the MDS runners, because you're so depleted and run down and tired, that if you get stung by the scorpion and don't get the venom out, you're probably going to die because you're in such a depleted state. So we saw a couple of those, but you're moving pretty quickly past them. So a weird thing happens, because we forget sometimes of the things that our bodies are capable of and our minds are capable of, and we realize that we're evolved primitive species that dealt with this from an anthropological point of view. We've dealt with poisonous snakes. We've dealt with poisonous scorpions. You're an evolved version of somebody who's passed on genes that has been able to pass on the ability to get through tough times and past these things that can potentially cause you harm. And when you're back in that state, your fight or flight system is just constantly going. Every time you see a snake, you get a little bit faster. Every time you see a scorpion, you get a little bit quicker. And your cortisol is running through your body. Your adrenaline is running through your body. And you're just piercing through, and you're moving, and you're putting one step in front of the other. The thing I struggled with on the long day was trying to stop my mind from going crazy. And because you're already 4 marathons in, you're already 3 marathons in on day 1, 2, and 3, and then you've got the double on day 4. So you're already depleted. You haven't really slept. Your sanitation's been crazy. You're calorie depleted. You're run down. Your water's been rationed. Your salt levels are all over the place. Your feet are mangled. My feet were bleeding and just completely ruined. And you're breaking down. You got to be mentally strong. And Simon would say to me, and Simon's done ultra marathons, he's ran 100-kilometer races, he's done Ironmans, and he would tell me that ultra marathons are 90% in your head and 10% in your mind. And that's how it is. I literally had 2 stories playing in my head over and over again on those long days. And again, you can't really control what comes into your head. You can't really control what keeps you going, because you're so depleted, you don't really have much control of those thoughts. But what was happening to me on that long day, particularly when it got tough, we hit about 60 kilometers and we still had about 26 kilometers to go, and you're running in the night time. You can't really see anybody ahead of you. You're just putting one foot in front of the other. Nobody's talking because no one's able to talk. And I was playing 2 stories over in my head, and I put a blog post on this on my Facebook recently, and it'll be on the new website when I get the blog section updated on the website, and I'll be doing weekly blogs on there again. And there was 2 stories playing over in my head. And for those of you that know why I signed up for the Marathon des Sables, one of the reasons was the fact that it terrified me and I wasn't sure if it was something I could do. The other was knowing that to be able to show up in the person I want to be, and particularly for my daughter Holly, who'll be 3 at the end of this month when this episode goes out, and knowing that for me to attack the things that I'm afraid of, and regardless of how hard things get, that you just need to move forward, and you just need to put one step in front of the other, either figuratively or literally, to get closer to what it is that you're trying to achieve. And the stories that were playing over in my head, just to give you a little bit of inside thought into what was happening for me, was I had 2 stories that played in parallel as I was running, and they played for what the guts of must have been 6 or 7 hours. And one of them was me sitting at my kitchen table when Holly was about 6 or 7 years old, and she's asking me about this race in the desert. And again, everything in your body, everything in your mind is telling you to quit. You're broken down. My legs and my muscular system were shutting down. Everything was cramped. Everything was broken in terms of I felt like I couldn't move. My feet were all mangled and bloody. I was dehydrated. I didn't have enough food. And everything is telling you to stop. And I had this vision in my head of Holly coming into me when I was 6 or 7 and asking me about this race in the desert, and asking me why I didn't finish it. Why couldn't Daddy do it? Why didn't I finish it? And I had to play it over and over in my head, and I could think of every excuse in the book. I could think of my feet were mangled and bloody. My muscular system was shutting down. My system was completely dehydrated and malnutrition. I didn't have enough food to keep my body going. But the truth is, I'd have to look at her and tell her that I just wasn't good enough. I wasn't strong enough. I wasn't mentally tough enough. And that was the realization. That was the truth. The only thing that I could have said that would have been honest was that I wasn't tough enough. Because even though it hurt, I knew the pain is temporary. Pain was going to go away. But if I quit and left and dropped out and told, the guys that I was running with, or told the doctors who were looking at me because they feared that I might get mild hypothermia on that last day because of my sweat and the cold in the night, and if they had pulled me or I had quit, I knew that it was down to me, and it was the fact that I wasn't mentally tough enough. And that played in my head that was the story that I would have to tell her, that it doesn't, when things get hard, that, and you can make every excuse in the book, and I had a load of them. I could make every single one of them and tell her those, but that wasn't the truth. The truth would have been that I wasn't strong enough. But another story played in parallel with this, and it was weird because you're hallucinating and you're seeing shit at that distance, and another story was playing in parallel, and I just kept circling back in my mind. And the other story was Holly at that same table, and it's weird how your brain works, but at that same table, she was 14 or 15, and she was crying about something that was going on, and I can't remember. I was so sleep deprived. This is about 18, 19 hours in, and she was crying about something that was difficult or hard, and I can't remember, was it a relationship or was it a sport thing or something to do with school, but she was crying to me saying that it was really hard and she couldn't do it. And I was able to look at her and tell her that it doesn't matter how hard things are, it doesn't matter how difficult it looks right now, whether it's your relationship, whether it's a sport thing, a fitness goal, a business, whatever the fuck it is, it doesn't matter how hard it is. You put one front foot in front of the other and you keep moving forward. You continually just progress and move and put that foot in front of the other, either figuratively or literally, and you move closer to it. And I was able to look her in the eyes and tell her that, and know that, having experienced the experience I had, and that's all I was doing on that long day. That last 16 kilometers, when the sun started to come back up and drain everything, you were putting one foot in front of the other, and you knew, even though it felt like you weren't getting any closer, every step you took, regardless of how big or how small, was moving you closer to that end goal. It was moving you closer to that finish line. It was moving you closer to the end. And everything in life is like that. All the difficult things, the relationships, the business decisions we make, the fitness goals, they're all fucking hard. But you put one foot in front of the other and you move forward. It doesn't matter how slowly you go, as long as you're moving in the right direction. And every step on that day was literally moving me closer to the finish line, but figuratively it gave me a reference point for everything else in life. And those two stories just played in parallel. And they're foggy and vague now, but at the time they were as clear as looking at a video screen or looking at your phone, and they just played over and over again, and they cycled between those two stories over and over again in my head for probably about 20 kilometers, 30 kilometers for about 6 or 7 hours. And that probably got me through, because that mental toughness, that is a choice. You're making that choice to give up. You're making that choice to go on. You're making that choice to realize and understand that the pain is temporary. And I love the Muhammad Ali quote, to suffer now and live the rest of your life as a champion. And pain was going to go. The pain is gone now, more or less. My feet have more or less cleared up. My muscles are back normal. I've been eating, I've been sleeping, I've been drinking again. The pain is gone. But I have a fucking medal around my neck now. And that is how everything shows up in people's lives. Every time there's pain showing up, either physical or figurative in some area of your life, realize that quitting is fucking forever. That's going to stick with you. But when you keep moving forward and you just push past the pain and realize that it's temporary, you're going to come out a stronger version of you out the other side. And that long day was physically the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. Mentally, I think I was in good stead to deal with it, doing competition preps, competing in bodybuilding, playing sport, running a business, all these other things that I've done. I've been very fortunate to have built up some mental strength with, but physically my body was broken. I got to that finish line and the last 3.5 kilometers felt like 20 miles. But I'm very grateful, having come out the other side of it, because you become a stronger version of you when you push these limits. And again, I'm not saying for anybody listening, you need to go do Marathon des Sables or run an ultra marathon or even run a marathon. These things are so relative. It doesn't matter what your goal is, and it can be completely relative to you. It might be to drop a dress size. It might be to get abs for the first time. It might be to add a little bit of size onto your arms. It might be to break into your senior football team or your inter-county team, whatever it is that you're trying to achieve. When you put one foot in front of the other and you continuously move forward towards that goal and you stay mentally tough and you realize that it will get sore and it will be painful and there'll be moments when you want to quit, and you just move past it and you start attacking those fears of that person you want to be, knowing there's a stronger version of you out the other side, you can achieve anything, because all your limits are self-created. They're a story you've told yourself. And that long day, that 86 kilometers, I did a short video on Instagram. You can check it out on Instagram, about a 30-second video where I spoke about how I felt at the end of the long day, where there was only a marathon left. It's on my Instagram. You can check it. Just have a scroll down. You'll see it, Brian Keane Fitness. And knowing that there was one day left, even though you were mangled, was an incredible feeling. And that brought us into the last day, which was day 6. That was one more marathon before the finish. So day 6 has notoriously the highest dropout rate. There was about 1,100 people total, a lot of Moroccans, a lot of African runners. I think I probably had about 20 kilos on most people there in terms of my build and even my background and what I had done. But about 1,100 people started. I think between 100 and 200 dropped out in total. And people on that long day were dropping out. I seen people hooked up to IVs from dehydration. There was people puking blood. Other people were shitting blood. There was a lot of stuff going on. I know a lot of people were pissing blood as well, because when your kidneys are dehydrated, they're looking for something that they can use for fluid, and your body will go to blood. So a lot of people pissing blood. And again, one of the controllables was staying hydrated. I was very, very conscious of my water and my salt, and I continuously sipped for the entire duration of the event, because one of the, again, probably my fortunate background in sports nutrition and understanding how the body works was, I know when you get dehydrated in somewhere like the desert, it's very, very hard to get rehydrated again because of the heat. So prevention is better than cure. So a lot of people that got dehydrated was the fact that they let their body get dehydrated and then thought that, well, I'll just drink more water if I need to and then I'll get rehydrated. That's not how it works in the desert. It's too hot for your body to come back. So a lot of people had to be hooked up to IVs, and that was what either got them through, or a lot of people had to drop out. A couple of people had to be helicoptered out. And the last day has the highest dropout rate because you're so broken from the long day. I remember getting up on the morning of the last day and I was finishing regardless of what happened. And I said this on previous podcasts, I've said this to people in my inner circle. One of two things was happening with the Marathon des Sables. I was either going to leave in a helicopter because of something that was going on from a health standpoint, and I wasn't going to put my life at risk. If something was happening and they told me, look, you're potentially going to die if you don't finish, you don't leave, then I was going to leave the race. That or I was going to finish. There was the only two scenarios that were going to happen. I burnt my boats completely, and it was one of those two things. I was not dropping out myself. I was not being pulled out if I was physically and medically cleared, and I was going to finish. And I knew on that last day I would fucking crawl over that last marathon and those 42 kilometers if I had to. And I woke up the morning of the last day and I was looking at the other guys around me in my tent, and everyone was broken to bits. And it took me probably an hour to walk what can only be described as about 50 meters to go to the toilet. I had to take a piss, and it took me nearly an hour because my feet were mangled from the long day. My muscular system barely worked. I came back to the tent, took a couple of painkillers, and realized that today was going to be a struggle. And I instantly got why people dropped out on that day. And it was funny because I knew before I went to the event that the highest dropout day was that last day. And I remember thinking in my head, how could you drop out when you're so close? And I get it. I got it then. That morning I got it, because to think about running or moving or shuffling or jogging 42 kilometers or a marathon distance on that day felt crazy in the morning. But again, like everything else, came back. I had an amazing group of people around me, and we all got through. And that last day was just putting one foot in front of the other and getting through it. And the relief of getting over the finish line at the end was unbelievable, because of the overwhelm of emotion that hit. And it was the first time, I think, ever in my life when I felt instantly proud of myself that I had done something. And I would repeat in my head subconsciously, I was telling myself, I did it. And I've spoken in the podcast, I've spoken in my book, I've spoken on other channels. I'm generally my own biggest critic, and a lot of us are, and a lot of you listening to me have that type A personality that we do something, then we move on to the next thing. We do something and we move on to the next thing. And we're not able to sit back and just say well done to ourselves or be proud of ourselves, because we're constantly looking forward, moving on to the next thing. A lot of high achievers, and if you're listening to this and you have that personality type, there's a good chance you're a high achiever in whatever area of your life you channel it. That character flaw can sometimes lead to that consistent state of anxiety where you never really feel like you've done anything. You never really feel like you're enough. You never really feel good enough. And this was probably the first time ever in everything that I've done, or anything I've done ever in my life. It was the first time that I was directly proud of myself that I was able to finish it. And again, I'm sure that sounds cheesy and whatever it is to anyone listening, but that was how I felt finishing it and getting over the finish line, having my photo with the Irish flag over the finish line. That's how I felt, because this was the only time that I was so afraid of attacking something. I was so afraid and terrified of doing it, and I didn't know if I could. And to be honest, if anyone asked, I told them I was going to finish it, and I told them I was going to do it, and I knew deep down I was. But I was still afraid that I mightn't be able. You still have that inner voice that you're like, something may happen. You may not be good enough for this. You may not be able for this. And that voice did come up. Even though I was able to quieten it, it still was there. And the reason that I felt nearly unstoppable when I came out the other side was that voice fucking died coming out that other side. Because there's nothing now. There's no limitation that I can see. There's no story I can tell myself that I can't look at and realize that there was moments of absolute terror and fear, even either mentally or physically or from a safety standpoint through that event that I felt. And you came out the other side. And looking back now, particularly a reflection after 6 or 7 days having been away and finished it, it makes you realize that it's all stories. It's all limitations that you've created, and your mind and your body can do incredible things if you make the decision to do it. And all it is making the decision, and all it is the choice. And one of the reasons that I'm recording this podcast episode is for anyone listening to realize that there's nothing different between me. There's nothing different between you listening. The only difference is the stories that we tell ourselves. And I was that person. The reason that I think I've been so fortunate with the growth of the podcast and the growth of all the social media platforms and the success of the book is I fucking know what it feels like, because I was that person. I was that person that was afraid to do things that were outside my comfort zone. I was that person to do things because I was afraid of what people would think. I was that person that was afraid to make decisions because, of the fear of success or the fear of failure. I was that person. I fucking did it for 25 years of my life, until I was age 25, when I started to make those different decisions. So one of the reasons that I'm probably able to relate with people on the level that I do, and I'm very fortunate, again, I'm sure this is subjective to each person, but it's the fact that I know it. I fucking was there. So when you relate to the things that I'm saying, I get it, because I was that person. I told myself these stories. A lot of these episodes that I create, I'm just talking to a younger me. And it resonates with people because we're not that different. We all have the self-limiting stories. We all have the self-limiting beliefs. We all have the structures or people or systems in our lives that don't support what we're doing. And I get it, because I was there. And doing something like the Marathon des Sables, having came from my background of, a Gaelic footballer, a bodybuilder, fitness model, not an endurance athlete, not a marathon runner, not an ultra marathon runner, not a survival expert by any fucking stretch. I barely know how to use a compass. And coming through something like Marathon des Sables, made me realize that anything that it is that you're trying to achieve can be done if you know what the end goal is and you break it down and you just focus on doing it the day after day after day, and realizing that you'll feel the fear, that you'll feel the terror, you'll tell yourself the stories, you'll hear the self-talk where you tell yourself you can't do something. You need to override that, because successful people hear that voice. Successful people feel that fear, but they do it anyways. And hopefully talking through this episode, and again, I know I've ranted and I've gone back and forth and I've jumped, and this has been a one take free flow episode, that I hope you got value from it. I know I got a lot of takeaways from the event. I got a lot of takeaways from pushing my mind, from pushing my body, and doing something that I didn't think I could. And I implore you to ask yourself what you're doing in your life that's the same. That may be a relationship thing. That may be a business decision. That may be a life or a fitness goal. Where are you limiting yourself? What's your Everest? What is it that you don't think you can achieve that you know you really want to? And then start breaking down those stories and why it's not true, because you can achieve whatever it is that you want to achieve. You just have to make the decision and then surround yourself with the right people and make sure that you're doing the right things every single day. The old adage of how do you build a wall? You don't build a wall by just putting all the bricks together. You lay the first brick as perfectly as it can be laid. Then you put the next brick on top of it. Then you put the next brick on top of that. And then someday down the line, you have a sturdy wall that's there forever. That's how life works. That's how big goals work. And that's how Marathon des Sables effectively was for me coming out the other side. So that covers basically everything from Marathon des Sables. I had an amazing experience. I have to say it's one of the best things that I've ever done in my life. I met incredible people. The people in my tent who were with me, Johnny, Fergal, Simon, Paddy, Hugh, Pete, amazing fucking people. All 7 of us finished the race, which is pretty unusual that a full tent of people will finish. From stories that I heard from other competitors that had done it previous years, but all of us got through it. I had Simon and Paddy with me for nearly the whole thing. I had Johnny beside me on the fucking sandstorm night, and the stories, the experience was just amazing. It shows that you're the average of the 5 people you surround yourself with, or you're the average of the 7 people you surround yourself with. And I know that one of the reasons that I had such an amazing experience and was able to get through it as strongly mentally as I was down to be able to feed off the energy of those guys. And it just shows that how you do anything is how you do everything, that it's so important to have the right network of people around you and whatever it is that you're trying to achieve, and surround yourself with people who are on the same journey as you. Every single one of us said on day one we were finishing that fucker, and every single one of us did, because that's what the people around you can do. When everyone has that belief and people are pushing through, and I've made incredible friends out of this. I'm going to meet a couple of the guys soon for coffee and drinks, and when you surround yourself with the people who are like-minded and have that will to just get it done, that will to achieve, that gives you energy and feeds you. When I was feeling low, the guys picked me up. When they were feeling low, I picked them up. That's how important your network of people is. So on top of all the new things that I was able to experience, on top of all the new stories that I was able to create, particularly ones that are going to serve me moving forward, it reinforced a lot of those old beliefs that you were the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with, that to be around the right people, moving in the right direction, and have everybody pulling together and supporting each other, that's going to support you in all areas of your life. That on top of making sure that you're mentally strong and breaking down your big goals, that making sure that you're attacking the fears of the person that you want to be, and realizing that everybody feels those fears and you just have to move forward anyways, feel the fear and do it anyways. Those reinforced ideas were heightened 10x coming out of Marathon des Sables. So on top of some of the new belief systems that I created for myself, some of the new stories I created, reinforcing the ideas of the people that are the most important in my life, particularly through that sandstorm, realizing that the average of the 5 people that you need to be around, people moving in the direction that you want to move, that are championing your life and you're championing theirs, and realizing that behind every fear is a person you want to be. When you combine these things and realize that those reinforced ideas, you give them legs, makes you a stronger version of you. So I'm hoping in my podcast and on my social media channels over the next few months, you'll see more of that, and I'll be able to provide more value and be able to serve more people and help you on your journey, whatever it is that you're trying to achieve, through the legs legs that I've given to my belief systems, and hopefully that it will help you. And then you start pushing those limits, you start questioning those stories, and you start moving to the stronger version of you, and you start attacking the fears of the person that you want to become, because behind every fear is the person that you want to be. So that wraps it up. We're about well over an hour into this episode, nearly coming into the hour and 15 mark. So hopefully you got a lot of value on this episode. It's, again, a completely different structure to normal. I wanted to do an episode just to talk about my experience, the ups, the downs, the lows, the stories that were going on in my head, the lead up to it, the aftermath. And as I said, hopefully you'll see a lot of those belief systems starting to translate over into other content so I can provide value to you listening. And again, hopefully you got a lot from this one, a little bit of a different episode. So please, if you got value from this, pass it on with your friends. Literally the best thing that I can ever hear, if I've ever helped you with the podcast, either through a Q&A or a solo or an episode like this, is when people are telling their friends or tagging me on their Instagram story that they're listening to the podcast, or that they got value in what it is that I'm providing, because that's literally why I do it. It's one of the greatest feedbacks I can get on a podcast is somebody messaging or sharing or telling a friend about how this episode helped them or this question helped them, and that's why I do it. So if you found value in today's episode, please pass it on. For anyone that wants to know more about Marathon de Sable or pushing limits in general, please tell them about it. So a massive thank you again for listening. A little bit of a longer episode this week, but again, hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to hit me up on Instagram, let me know what you thought. Brian_Keane_fitness on Instagram. Catch you all next week.